another episode with the Life Kawaii. Today I have my new sewing project, which is this very adorable and kawaii Pikachu dress. So for this sew along I will be using Butterick pattern 6322, and I'm using a fantastic kawaii Pikachu fabric. And if you're interested in the fabric, I linked it below. This sew along is probably going to be about 3 videos long because it took me about 3 days to complete the project in total. And we will cover doing all of the gathering stitches, putting in the grommets, doing the hem by hand, and then also doing all of this hand work around the armhole and also the neck. And then we also have in the back our zipper to install. So these are all of the things that I will cover in the sew along. So the Pikachu dress takes about 3 days to complete in total, and that's if you do all of the hand stitching that I'm going to show you. And I would recommend the hand stitching because that is part of the reason it is so adorable. And if any of you are interested in purchasing the Pikachu dress, I am selling it. Feel free to message me. And I've also listed the price below in the box if anyone wants to look. So this dress is for sale, but if you want to make your own, gather all of your things, your fabric, your scissors, your thread, your grommets, your suede tie if you want to do what I did, and let's start this sew along. Okay, here we go. Step 1, I'm just going to jump right in here. We are going to be gathering our upper bodice front. So you'll want to find the piece that says bodice upper front, and you're going to see that it has all these different markings on it that you should have made. One here, one up here, and one at the side here, and a small one right there in the middle. And we are just going to be basting in between all of those sections. So this is what piece 1 looks like. It's cut on the fold, and then your machine stitch should be set at its longest width. So I have mine here on 5. And I'm going to start with the inside of the neckline here. So just a little bit in from 5/8 with that long stitch, and I'm going to stitch the whole piece. So just in case any of you are new to my sew-alongs, I always like to do my basting or gathering stitches a little bit slightly in from the exact seam allowance that they give you, and that's just because I don't want the threads to show once I finish the garment. So if I move in that seam just a tiny bit, it'll all be hidden once I finish. Right. Okay, there's one stitch done. Make sure that you leave your threads long enough that you can pull them later. If you chop them too close, they're harder to work with. And now I'm going to do a second basting, another stitch, very close to that. So right here, I'm going to move in just slightly and then stitch again. So this one is just a little bit more inwards. And that just makes your gathering stitch a lot easier to do. Also makes it neater. It looks more clean whenever you have 2 lines of basting than 1. To the end. Once again, making sure that I leave thread long enough that I'll be able to actually pull on it. So that finishes that part. Now we need to do the exterior here. So this little sleeve section gets done by itself. And we're going to do the same thing using that same stitch, slightly in from 5/8. Careful as you round the corner there. Leaving enough thread to pull on it. And then doing that next basting just slightly inwards from the one you just did. Okay. Now let's do the other side of that. So same thing, other side. One more time, slightly in. You guys, I'm sorry about all the noise that you're going to hear in the background. My heat in my apartment is crazy intense, so even in winter I tend to leave the window open. And right now, since it's Halloween night, you can imagine in New York City what is down there on the street. Lots and lots of craziness. Okay, the last basting we have to do to finish step 1 is the bottom now. So this big long stretch of the bottom, we're going to do that one. I can hear a child screaming because it's upset about its candy already. My Halloween is was very different for me as a kid, just to talk while I'm doing this. Since I grew up in Kentucky, we just went to people's houses and it was safe to get candy from people, and it wasn't dangerous like it is now. I don't even know what they do now since I haven't obviously been trick-or-treating in forever, but in New York, all of the kids go trick-or-treating either at their school, where they set up something beforehand where the parents will bring the kids in and then they'll just go around like at little kiosks and pick up candy and play games and things like that, or they'll go into businesses. So since my apartment is located on the very long strip of Broadway, there are plenty of businesses in this section, so I've been watching the kids go in and out of the businesses across the street outside my window all night. The Claire's down the street is giving out pretty good candy. I think they were giving out some full-size candy bars. Okay, one more of those long stitches and we'll be done with step 1. Alright, I'll try to do this one fast. I just sewed through a Pikachu's face. Sorry, Pikachu. I'm gonna do it again. Ugh, pains me a little bit every time. Alright, finally rounding the end here. Yay! Okay, now you can just set that piece aside for a little bit. Set that there, and that finishes step 1. Now let me go grab what's next, which is going to be our piece 2, and we'll do the stay stitching for that. Alright, moving right along here, we are now at number 2. Number 2 says to stay stitch the midriff front. So just find your piece 2. So here's piece 2, midriff front. And it looks like this because you should have cut it on the fold. And then you just need to make sure, because you'll need them in a minute, that you marked everything here. So you should have a square and a circle and another circle that's a little bigger. for a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 markings. And now we're just going to do a stay stitch, which is a permanent stitch. So I'm just resetting my machine because I still had the basting stitch on. And I'm just going to run that through at 5/8. Back stitch a little. Again. All right, and that is done. This fabric is so cute. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to be doing is attaching both of those pieces that we just worked on. So they're going to be right sides together whenever you sew it. I guess I'll show you really quick. This is going to be that front gathered part, so you're going to be sewing it together like this eventually, but all of this has to get gathered into this seam. So you'll want to go ahead and then pin up your sides. So you're just going to pin these together. Oh, I need my pins. Hold on. Okay, let's try this again. Pinning together those corners. I always start from the outside and work my way in. And I would recommend that you put a pin in at the end and then also another one at the other end before you start matching your dots and things. All right. Now you can start matching things up. And it takes me a minute to find my dots on this fabric. Okay, here's one. And here's my other one. Just matching those up. And then I should have another one here. There we go. Then find the matching one on the other piece of fabric. So hard to see on here. And then I have another one over here. I thought white chalk would be easiest to see on this. Kind of wish I'd done it in like a green or something now. It's harder to see than I thought it would be. Okay, there's one more. And there should be one more in here. Oh, so hard to see. Oh, lovely. Lovely Halloween New York noises. Okay, that one, we're gonna have to wait till that sound goes away. I'm gonna go ahead and apologize ahead of time that I had to go ahead and do most of this, but if I had waited for that car alarm to go off before continuing, I would have been sitting here for at least 2 hours. So, I went ahead and pinned most of it, and I'm just gonna show you here at the ends briefly what you're going to be doing, just in case any of you haven't done this before. Now, I do have 4 threads over here, and that's because I have, of course, bastings on all sides. So just make sure that you grab the right threads. So these are the 2 that I need. Those are the 2 threads on the top here. And I'm just going to repin the end here. And you want to pin close to where the threads actually come out of the fabric here. And you'll see why when you start to pull it, because it's just easier. So let me pull a little bit of this out just so you can see it. Okay, so when you pull your top 2 threads, just those top 2, you'll see your fabric continue to bunch like this. And you just want to pull it taut enough that it fills up the space that you have between your two pins. So this is a section that I had pinned. I have 2 dots here, and then this is my seam. So I know that I need to fit that in between there. So I just pull until I have the same length on both pieces. So now these fit together. And then I'm going to take my 2 threads and just wrap them around the needle. And that's just to hold them in place until I stitch. Now, you don't want to just stitch that like that. You want to fit it through. So fit your gathers, just pull on them gently. And then another thing I like to do sometimes is hold the top like this, just because I think it makes a prettier seam. And then take your fabric and just kind of pull it down like that. I think it makes a nicer seam when you're done. It kind of helps get out these little bunches. Okay, so once you have that pretty much spread throughout the entire section there, you'll want to pin that down. And you can use a few pins or a lot of pins if you like. I like to use a lot of pins whenever I'm doing gathers because I just think it makes it a lot easier to stitch. Ugh, more sirens. I don't know if you guys can hear those or not. Halloween in New York. This is why I don't tend to do much on Halloween night in New York, because people become insane. All I've heard since I got home and started sewing are sirens. Okay, we're all pinned. Now we're going to sew that together in a 5/8 seam. So here we go. Make sure you don't have a basting stitch on here. You just need your regular stitch. We're just going to start at 5/8 and stitch that all together. Do a back stitch. And when you're stitching this, if you can, try to aim so that you're hiding your basting stitches on the inside, because you don't want to have to go through later and try to cut those out. You can, and it's easy enough to do, but it's tedious, so you want to try to avoid that if you can. And then I would also recommend, as you're going through and stitching this down, if you find an area where there are a lot of puckers or the fabric isn't laying straight, you'll want to try to pull that so it's straight. So just because you have this pinned and you have the gathers spread out as you want them, doesn't mean that the fabric will all of a sudden not fold over, and you don't want that look. You want your gathers to still be perky and straight. So right here in the middle section, that's where the gathers are the thickest, just because of the way that they worked the pattern. So that's a good place to kind of just gently pull on this side of the fabric, just to make sure that it's laying nicely. Okay, see this here? This is a prime example of where my fabric's trying to lay funky. So I'm just going to gently pull that straight and then sew it like that so it looks nicer when it's done. Alright, we're rounding the end here. Almost there, almost. Make sure your last pin that's holding your threads, if you wrapped your threads like I did, make sure to sew over that pin if you can before you take the pin out. Otherwise, if the threads come loose and move around, all of a sudden your top piece won't match with the bottom piece, and that's just a pickle to deal with. and then do a back stitch. Okay, so let me show you what this looks like. Ta-da! It's a sort of bodice. Obviously we still have to do more work on it, but you get the idea. So the next thing that we'll need to do is actually stitch again through here. And then we're going to trim it out. So I'm not going to show that part. What you'll need to do is just stitch 1/4 in the seam allowance here next to that stitch that you already did, and then you're just going to trim all of that out. Moving right along here, we're now at step 4. Now I'm just going to show you this. This is both of my interfaced pieces. I've already done this, and I'm not going to cover attaching the interfacing. If you need that, there are so many videos on YouTube that you can watch on how to apply your interfacing. If you do have questions, you can post them below and I'll answer them as soon as I see them. So moving on from step 4, you should have your interfacing already completed, and then you're going to be attaching your extra pieces. So this is your piece 3, and you should have 4 of those. So 2 of those get interfaced, and then you should have 2 other pieces that are not interfaced. And you're going to be putting those right sides together. So just match up right sides. Okay, set that aside, and then match up the right sides of your other piece as well. Okay, and then we're going to be stitching these together at the top here, down the side, and then along the bottom. So I'm just going to roughly pin that. Pin the edges. And then I'll do one here in the middle. Then pin the edges here as well. And then also do one pin in the middle of both of those sections too, just to help keep things from wiggling around, which I think I'll use 2 here. Okay, so now we're just going to stitch that using a regular 5/8 inch stitch. Back stitch. And then I'm going to backstitch a little bit at my corners. Anytime I have a piece that I'm going to be eventually turning out, I always like to reinforce the corners. Okay. Reinforce that corner. Reinforce this corner. Oh, I went a little far on that one. I'm going to try to keep everything at 5/8. Needs to go down a little bit more. Perfect. 5/8. And then back stitch at the end here. Okay, so there's one. I'll set that one aside. Now I'll pin the next one. Just going to do the same thing that I did on the other piece. Pin my edges together first. I'll put one pin in the middle. And just keep doing that for that whole seam that needs to be stitched. I'm usually a big fan of using a whole bunch of pins, but whenever I'm working with pieces that are interfaced, they're so great because they hardly move. Most fabrics, they'll stay pretty much in place. So I know that I don't need to pin it too much. Very easy to work with an interfaced piece. Alright, stitching this one, same exact way. 5/8, back stitching. And then when I get to the end here, I'll reinforce it a little bit. Reinforce this one too. Now I'm just finishing up the rest of that seam. And then back stitching at the end. Okay, so let's see what else we need to do with these pieces. Right sides together, da 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 da, yes we did that. Having it stitched, yes we did that. Okay, now it just wants us to trim them. So now we're just going to trim these down. So grab your scissors, and you're going to trim at least half of this out. I always like to aim for half on the outside of the seam that you made. So your seam, cut out at least half of this all the way around. And when you get to the corners here, you'll want to also cut sideways at an angle. I'll show you one of mine, what it looks like once I finished it. And cutting it sideways at the edge here just means that it will flip out better. So let me trim mine and I'll show you what mine look like right before I flip them. Here's an example of what mine look like. So you can see they're nicely trimmed out. Takes away a lot of the bulk weight of the piece. And then the edges here, I've made them curved. You can also just clip them straight if you want, but I think curved looks nicer. And then the reason that you do that is because the next step, in step 6, you need to flip them out, and it just makes the corners look nicer when you trim them out like that. There we go, nice little point. And I finally get to see my adorable Pikachus. If you want to make super nice points, sometimes I take out my crochet needles, the thicker ones of course, not the tiny ones. You don't want to puncture your fabric, but I'll just take a crochet needle and put it up in there. And that will also make a really nice point. Okay, so here's one. It's very pretty. Let me flip the other one. And once we get these flipped out, we're just going to be basting our loose edges. But make sure before you do your basting that you're really happy with how your points look, because once it's basted, forever hold your piece. You cannot get back into the seam once it's basted closed and it's ready to be sewn in the next step. Okay, I'm pretty happy with this. Now, before I baste these, I'm just going to make sure to press the seam flat as best as I can. And that's because I don't want to have a weird fold that shows up on either side of the fabric. And of course, start with your edges. Always start with the edges. So just make sure that that fold is as flat as possible. Pin those down. Then you'll just fit in the rest of this. Okay, now I'm just going to baste that. So using my long stitch, which for me is 5, and I am going to do the basting similar to earlier whenever I didn't quite do it at 5/8. I want to do it a little bit on the inside because this basting is just to hold this in place, and it's just easier for the next seam that I do to encase all of the basting on the inside if I do it slightly in from 5/8. Okay. And don't worry if your basting's not perfect. It's just to hold everything in place so it doesn't have to be beautiful. So there's one. I'm going to do that exact same thing for the other piece. When I was cutting this one out, I was trying my best to try to keep at least 2 of these Pikachus. Okay, and that finishes number 6, which means we get to move on and I get to flip the paper, which feels so rewarding. Yay! Okay. Moving on to number 7, with interface side down, pin 1 overlay section to each side of bodice front. Okay, so that piece you did earlier, luckily for me, mine is right behind me. Let me move my machine some more. So you have your top piece here. This is that gathered top that you did. And now we're just going to be attaching the pieces that we just did to the front here. So since these pieces are the same, this is the same piece, right? So you're going to be attaching them like this. Since I am using such a kawaii cute fabric, I'm going to take some time right now to look at what I have on each piece, because technically I could sew this like this or I could sew it like this. So usually when I am sewing things like this, I like to have the interfaced section on the outside just because it's nicer, but I think for something like this, it's more important to me to have the fabric selection that I want. So I'm just going to take a look here. I think this side looks better on this one. Tricky. So if I do it this way, I almost have 6 Pikachus. This side looks really good, this side's not perfect. If I do it this way, okay, I would rather do it like this. This one looks a little bit better. At least on this one, the Pikachu still has a head. If I flip it over, I have a headless Pikachu. And I understand that this is a Halloween thing. However, headless Pikachu is not my desired effect. So, this is how I will be doing mine. With that said, let's do the first one. And this is just going to be basted for now too. So just match up the top. And then match up your bottom. Oh, sorry, don't match up your bottom. Match up your top, then match up your notch. And then the bottom, I would recommend you just stitch this, and then when you get to the bottom here, you're just going to back stitch the end. You can see when you're doing this, your bodice piece is going to be longer, and the reason for that is when you attach the skirt later, you're going to be stitching 5/8 right here, and that's going to be encased, but you still want this to move. So it should not be the same length as the piece underneath. Make sense? So just match up the top and the notch, and then I would recommend that you just freehand the rest of this, and then just backstitch here to make sure that that doesn't move around on you. So here we go. Still on a basting stitch. Although you could stay stitch this too. It's not a big deal. Alright. Then if you're doing what I'm doing and you're freehanding this, just make sure everything's lined up. Alright, and then I'm just going to do a tiny little back stitch here just to help keep that in place. And now I'm going to do that exact same thing on the other side. So matching up my pieces here, pinning together the top, and I want to make sure that I keep stitching in that same direction. So just make sure. It's tempting when you're sewing this to sew it through like this just so you can see the fabric. I would recommend that you try to stitch your seams in general in most things that you make in the same direction. Okay, and since I can't see the bottom of this one, I am going to pin it, since it's going to be underneath when I stitch it. That way I will know where to do my tiny little back stitch. Okay, here we go. 5/8 from the top and a basting stitch. And then here's my pin marking where I want to do my little back stitch, just to keep that thick fabric in place. Alright, so now let me show you what you should have when you finish that. This is your top gathered bodice. Okay, and this is the part that's going to be over your waist below the bust. And then these are your, I'm going to call them flaps, because if you guys have been watching my sewing things, then you know that I like to call these flaps for some reason. Anything that's flappy I like to call a flap. So, set that aside. The next thing says we're going to gather the upper edge of each bodice upper back section between small circles and triangles. Okay, so I need to go grab my other piece. So give me a second to do that, and then we'll continue.